In the frozen cradle of the northern wilds, where the moon wept silver tears upon the snow, a single drop of blood bloomed like a forbidden rose against the white. Ilara stumbled through the blizzard's embrace, her breath ragged ghosts in the howling wind. The world was a blur of white fury, the kind that clawed at the soul as much as the skin. She had been cast out at dawn, when the pack's elders pronounced her curse upon them all, a barren Omega they called her, a vessel cracked by the gods, unworthy of the hearth's warmth or the Alpha's claim. Her mate, once promised in the moonlit rites, had turned his back first, his rejection a blade sharper than any claw. "You bring only silence to our bloodline," he had snarled, his eyes cold as the frost now biting her heels. And so they had driven her to the borderlands, the forsaken veil between their territory and the endless void, leaving her with nothing but the tattered cloak of her station and the weight of shame that pressed heavier than the snowdrifts. The wind screamed like distant wolves, carrying echoes of the pack's uivos, triumphant, indifferent. Ilara's fingers, numb and blue-veined, clutched at the thin chain around her neck. The pendant dangled there, a small vial of crimson sealed with ancient silver. It was her mother's legacy, a relic from the old temples where the Deusa whispered secrets to those who could listen. "Blood speaks," her mother had said in fevered breaths before the wasting sickness claimed her. "And you, child, were born to translate its tongue." But what good was that gift in exile? The pack had mocked it as delusion, a mad Omega's fancy, unfit for the strength of alphas and the fertile bloom of true mates. Now, as the storm raged, the vial swung like a pendulum of accusation, its contents warm against her chest despite the cold, a mocking pulse, as if the blood within remembered the life it once fueled. She collapsed against a jagged outcrop of ice-sheathed rock, the mountain's spine rising like the ribs of some ancient beast. The snow here was deeper, a merciless shroud that swallowed her knees, her resolve. Vision blurring with tears that froze on her lashes, Ilara pressed her forehead to the stone, feeling the earth's indifferent chill seep into her bones. What was strength, if not enduring this unraveling? The pack's fires flickered in her mind's eye, distant beacons of betrayal, warmth she had earned through years of quiet service, tending the wounded after hunts, weaving the moon wards that kept shadows at bay. Yet they had seen only her barrenness, a flaw in the weave of destiny. The Alpha's mate, ripe with promise, had whispered poisons in his ear, turning rejection into banishment. "Go to the wilds," the elders had intoned, their voices grave with false piety. "Let the Deusa judge your worth or claim you as her own." But the Deusa was silent tonight, her lunar gaze veiled by the storm's rage. Ilara's body ached, not just from the cold, but from the deeper wound, the hollow ache where connection should have bloomed. Omegas were meant to bind, to heal the fractures of the pack with their empathy, their unspoken knowing. She had felt it once, in fleeting touches during the full moon rites, a thread of silver light pulling her toward wholeness. Now, severed, she was adrift, a leaf in the gale. The vial at her throat seemed to throb, warmer now, as if stirring in response to her despair. She unclasped it with trembling hands, holding it to the faint light filtering through the clouds. Inside, the blood swirled lazily, dark and viscous, carrying whispers she alone could hear. Fragments of pain, of battles long past, of lives intertwined in crimson fate. A low growl rumbled from the shadows beyond the rocks. Not the wind this time, but something alive, predatory. Ilara froze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The wilds were no place for the unmarked. Rogue beasts prowled these borders, drawn by the scent of vulnerability. She tucked the vial away, forcing herself to stand, legs burning as she scanned the white expanse. Footprints marred the snow, her own, erratic and deep, leading from the pack's edge like a trail of confession. Had they followed? No, mercy was not their creed tonight. The growl came again, closer, accompanied by the crunch of paws on crust. Panic surged, hot and primal, mingling with the cold that clawed her lungs. She backed against the rock, whispering a word to the moon, though her voice cracked like thin ice. The storm parted for a moment, revealing the silhouette. Not a beast, but a figure cloaked in shadow, staggering through the drifts. Broad shoulders bowed under an unseen burden, his form etched in silver moonlight. A lone wolf, perhaps, or something more haunted. Alara's instincts flared, that omega pull she could never fully suppress, urging her to reach out even as fear rooted her in place. Who wandered these wastes, marked by the scent of blood and sorrow? The figure paused, head lifting as if scenting her, and in that suspended breath, the vial at her neck burned like a brand. The wind howled anew, burying the moment in white oblivion, but Alara knew, in the marrow of her exile, that isolation was ending, not in salvation, but in the inexorable draw of fates colliding. The blood in the vial hummed a single word, ancient and binding: him. The figure emerged from the storm's maw like a specter forged in the Deuce's forge, his cloak a tattered banner of midnight fur, sodden and heavy with the weight of unseen sins. Alara's breath caught, a fragile vapor in the air, as he drew nearer, each step a labored defiance against the wind's assault. Blood scented the gale now, sharp and metallic, mingling with the crisp bite of pine and frost. A trail that spoke of wounds freshly torn, not the stale echo of hunts past. Her fingers tightened around the vial at her throat, its warmth a counterpoint to the ice creeping through her veins. What madness had the wilds conjured? A wanderer in these forsaken reaches was either fool or fugitive, and this one carried the aura of both, shadowed by a nobility that the storm could not fully erase. He stumbled then, one knee sinking into the snowdrift mere paces from her shelter, a guttural sound escaping his lips, not a cry, but a restrained thunder, as if pain were a beast he refused to unleash. Up close, the moonlight pierced the clouds just enough to gild his features. A face carved from the mountains themselves, high cheekbones etched with lines of weary command, eyes like storm-tossed seas, gray and fathomless. A crown of dark hair, matted with ice, framed a brow scarred by an old blade's kiss, silvered with time. But it was the blood that commanded her gaze, seeping from a gash across his shoulder, staining the fur of his cloak in rivulets that traced patterns like ancient runes upon the white canvas below. Alpha, her instincts whispered, unbidden and fierce, the word coiling in her gut like a living flame. Not just any. The scent of him was laced with the musk of thrones and battles, of packs vast as the northern skies. Fear bloomed first, a cold knot that urged her to flee, to melt back into the rocks and let the storm claim him as it would her. Omegas did not approach the wounded mighty. They served from afar, their empathy a quiet current, not a flood. Yet curiosity stirred beneath the terror, a traitorous pull that drew her eyes to the vial once more. It pulsed now, insistent, the blood within swirling as if alive, murmuring fragments in a tongue older than words. Guilt, oath, shadow. She had translated such echoes before, in the quiet hours tending the pack's fallen, but never so vividly, never so personal. Who was he, this intruder upon her exile, that her curse or gift should awaken for him? He lifted his head, those gray eyes locking onto hers with the precision of a predator's strike. For a heartbeat, the world stilled, the wind's howl muted, the snow's descent suspended, as recognition flickered in his gaze, not of her face, but of her essence. The Omega bond, that invisible thread woven by the Deuce's hand, thrummed between them, raw and electric, pulling at the hollows of her chest. It was instinct, primal as the moon's tide, urging her to soothe, to bind his fractures with the warmth she had been denied. But denial crashed in its wake. He was no stray wolf to pity, no kin to claim. His presence reeked of danger, of pursuits that could drag her deeper into the void. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice a threadbare veil against the gale, though her body betrayed her, inching forward despite the tremor in her limbs. He did not lunge or snarl. Instead, a shadow of sorrow crossed his features, deepening the lines of his face. "The storm hides no mercy," he rasped, his voice a low timbre like distant thunder rolling over glacial peaks. Words laced with the weight of crowns, of decisions that bled empires dry. He pressed a gauntleted hand to his wound, the leather cracked and dark with use, and Alara saw the flicker of restraint, the ethical core of a king who would not beg, even as blood pooled beneath him. Alaric, the name surfaced unbidden in her mind, carried on the vial's whispers, a title more than a man. Alpha King of the Iron Fang clans, whispered in pack tales as the one who bore the Deuce's curse for a betrayal long past. Guilt had hollowed his eyes, duty chained his steps. He fled not from beasts, but from the ghosts of his own making. Curiosity warred with fear, drawing her closer still, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his form, a forge's glow against the winter's bite. She knelt in the snow, unclasping her tattered cloak and extending it toward him, the gesture born of that denied instinct, the Omega's call to heal what was broken. His hand brushed hers as he grasped the edge, rough, calloused, yet gentle in its surprise, and in that touch the vial burned hotter, the blood's language flooding her senses, visions of a throne room stained red, a mate's lifeless form, a vow shattered under the full moon's judgment. He rejected her. It sang, to save his realm, and the Deusa marked him for it, eternal solitude until redemption's key turns. Ilara recoiled, the connection snapping like frost underfoot, her heart pounding with the echo of his pain. Not hers to mend. She was the rejected, the barren shadow, not some destined salve. Yet the pull lingered, instinctive and undeniable, curiosity sharpening into something perilously like need. Alaric's gaze held hers, searching, as if he too felt the thread tightening. "You see it," he murmured. Not a question, but an accusation born of isolation. The storm raged on, burying their tracks, but in that fragile interlude, fates had brushed too close, fear yielding to the first fragile spark of what might bind or break them both. What was redemption, if not the terror of touching another's wound? The vial cooled against her skin, silent now, but its words echoed in the chambers of her soul, binding her inexorably to the king who bled before her. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's maw yawned like a wound in the mountain's flank, its jagged teeth of ice glistening under the moon's reluctant gaze. Ilara led the way, her steps tentative in the deepening snow, the stranger, Alaric, the vial had named him, following with a limp that betrayed the gravity of his injury. The storm had eased to a sullen whisper, but the wind still carried the metallic tang of pursuit, faint howls threading through the pines like warnings from the Deusa herself. She had not invited him. The gesture of her cloak had been instinct, a reflexive offering born of the Omega's curse to mend what others shattered. Yet here he was, his presence a shadow at her back, heavy with the unspoken weight of thrones and treacheries. Inside, the air hung thick and still, laced with the mineral bite of damp stone and the faint earthy musk of forgotten hibernations. Ilara kindled a small fire with flint from her pouch, the flames leaping to life like hesitant spirits, casting flickering gold across the rough-hewn walls. The warmth was a balm against the chill that had seeped into her marrow, but it did little to thaw the knot of wariness in her chest. She glanced at Alaric, who had slumped against the far wall, his broad frame folding into itself as if to contain the pain. Blood darkened the snow at his feet, a stark bloom mirroring the vial's crimson secret against her skin. It pulsed faintly now, not with the fevered urgency of before, but with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat sinking to his own labored breaths. "You should not have come," she said softly, her voice echoing in the confined space, the words more accusation than concern. She tore a strip from her cloak's hem, dipping it into a trickle of meltwater from the ceiling, and approached him warily. The firelight danced in his gray eyes, revealing depths etched with the scars of command, decisions that had cost lives, loves, legacies. He watched her, unblinking. As she knelt and pressed the cloth to his wound, the gash a ragged tear across his shoulder, deep enough to have felled a lesser wolf. His skin was fever-hot under her fingers, the muscle taut and unyielding, yet he did not flinch. Instead, a low rumble escaped his throat, not pain, but something akin to gratitude, restrained and regal. "The wilds claim the solitary," he replied, his timbre a gravelly murmur that resonated through the stone, stirring the embers in her core. "And you carry light in exile." His gaze flicked to the vial, the chain glinting like a silver vein in the fire's glow. She felt exposed under that scrutiny, as if he could peer through flesh to the blood's confessions she alone deciphered. Empathy stirred unbidden, a warm current pulling at her resolve. The same instinct that had bound her to the pack's hurts, now treacherous in its intimacy. She had rejected such pulls before, after her mate's scorn, burying them beneath layers of survival. But here, in this hollow refuge, with the wind's distant uivos growing sharper, it bloomed like the fire between them, insistent and illuminating. The vial warmed again, its contents swirling as fragments of his essence seeped through her touch. Visions of ironclad halls where banners hung limp in defeat, a queen's eyes dimming under his blade. Not malice, but mercy twisted by war's cruel arithmetic. The rival alpha's poison, the blood whispered, demanded her life or the realm's fall. He chose duty, and the Deusa cursed him with isolation. Her mark, a thorn in his soul. Guilt radiated from him like heat from the flames, a king's melancholy forged in the forge of impossible choices. Ilara's hand trembled, the cloth soaking through with his blood, staining her skin in intimate rivulets. What was strength, if not bearing the echoes of another's fracture? She pulled back, but he caught her wrist gently, his grip a calloused anchor, eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that pierced deeper than any claw. "I see too much," she confessed, her voice fracturing like thin ice. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling toward the cave's ceiling, where shadows clung like unspoken regrets. Outside, the howls crescendoed, no longer distant, pursuers, their scents threading through the night. Feral, laced with the acrid bite of betrayal. Alaric tensed, his body coiling despite the wound, a low growl building in his chest. "My shadows," he said, releasing her with reluctance, rising to his feet in a fluid motion that belied his pain. "The Iron Fang's remnants twisted by the traitor's hand. They hunt the king who fell." Alara's heart thundered. The Omega bond flaring, a visceral tug urging her to stand with him, not flee. The cave's entrance darkened as shapes materialized in the moonlight. 3 wolves, hulking and scarred, their eyes glowing with feral hunger, fur matted with the grime of relentless chase. The leader snarled, lips curling over fangs yellowed by bloodlust, his voice a guttural rasp. "The cursed king ends here, in the Deusa's forgotten lair." They lunged as one, claws scraping stone, the air filling with the stench of rage and rot. Alaric met them head-on, his form a blur of shadowed fury, gauntleted fists and bared teeth felling the first with a bone-crunching strike. Blood sprayed, warm and coppery, mingling with the cave's chill. But numbers favored the attackers. One raked his side, reopening old wounds, while the second circled for the kill. Alara's fear ignited into action. The vial burned like a star against her chest, its language flooding her. Protect the broken, for in union lies the moon's grace. She seized a loose rock, heavy and jagged, and swung it with desperate precision, cracking against the second wolf's skull. It yelped, staggering, giving Alaric the moment to dispatch it with a savage twist. The leader turned on her then, eyes narrowing in contempt for the barren exile. But Alaric was there, shielding her with his body, his roar shaking the walls like thunder from the peaks. They fought as one, her instincts guiding his strikes, empathy translating to strategy, her whispers of the blood's warnings dodging lethal blows. The final foe fell, throat torn, his blood pooling in the firelight, a crimson mirror to the vial's secrets. Panting, Alaric slumped against her, their breaths mingling in the aftermath, the cave a sanctuary stained with the proof of their fragile alliance. In that shared silence, as the fire popped and the wind mourned outside, empathy deepened into something irrevocable, a bond forged not in tenderness, but in the raw alchemy of survival. Ilara traced the fresh gash on his arm, her touch lingering, the vial's warmth spreading through them both like moonlight on snow. He did not pull away. Instead, his hand covered hers, gray eyes holding a spark of wonder amid the guilt. The deuce's thread tightened, weaving rejection into refuge, pain into possibility. Yet doubt lingered in her soul. What chains would this king forge around her wandering heart? The flames danced higher, illuminating the blood's language etched in their joined hands. Redemption begins where fear yields to fire. The fire's embers pulsed like a fading heartbeat in the cave's gloom, casting elongated shadows that danced across the blood-smeared stone like specters reluctant to depart. Ilara's fingers lingered on Alaric's arm, the fresh wound beneath her touch a raw testament to their improbable alliance. The metallic tang of spilled life hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke and the underlying chill that seeped from the walls, a reminder that refuge was fleeting in the Diusa's unforgiving wilds. Her own body ached, not from blows landed or dodged, but from the surge of empathy that had flooded her during the fray, and Omega's instinct amplified, pulling her into the rhythm of his fight, as if their pulses had merged under the moon's watchful eye. She withdrew her hand slowly, staring at the crimson streaks on her palm, the warmth of it seeping into her skin like an unwelcome confession. The vial at her throat thrummed in response, its silver chain a cool anchor against the heat rising in her chest. It had always been thus. Blood called to her, whispering secrets in a tongue woven from pain and legacy, but never so insistently, never with such clarity. In the pack's service, she had translated fragments, echoes of hunters' wounds revealing hidden infections or the elders' veiled histories in ceremonial cuts. They had dismissed it as intuition, a barren Omega's parlor trick, unfit for the pack's raw power. Yet here, in this bloodied sanctum, the language swelled, demanding to be heard. Alaric shifted, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on reverence, the king's melancholy etched deeper in the firelight's hollows. He did not speak at first, his breath steadying as he bound the gash with the remnants of her cloak, his movements deliberate, restrained by the weight of duty that clung to him like frost. "You fought as one bound by blood," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, stirring the embers to brief life. Not as exile, but as seer. The word hung between them, laced with the gravity of ancient prophecies, the kind murmured in lunar temples where the Diusa's priestesses divined fates from spilled vitae. Ilara's heart stuttered, a fragile bird against her ribs. She had hidden this gift since her mother's death, burying it beneath layers of rejection, fearing it would only deepen her isolation. But the vial's pulse quickened, urging her forward, and she could no more deny it than the moon could refuse the tide. Dipping her fingers into the pooling blood at his feet, His and the fallen wolves' mingled essence. She brought it to her lips. A ritual as old as the northern clans, tasting the salt and iron on her tongue. The cave blurred, the fire's crackle fading to a distant hum as visions cascaded through her. Not mere echoes, but a torrent, vivid as the storm outside. She saw him enthroned in a hall of iron and ice, banners of the Ironfang clans fluttering like wounded wings under a vaulted ceiling pierced by glacial light. A queen stood before him, her belly swollen with the promise of heirs, her eyes, once soft with love, now shadowed by the rival's poison that twisted her veins black. Alaric's hand on the hilt of his blade, trembling not with hatred, but with the agony of choice, end her suffering to spare the realm from the traitor's curse, or let the venom spread, dooming his people to madness. The Deuce's moon hung full in the sky beyond the windows, bearing witness as he whispered apologies into her ear, the blade sinking true. Blood bloomed across her gown, a river of red that stained the throne room floor, and in that moment, the goddess marked him. A silver scar blooming across his chest, invisible to flesh but burning eternal, a curse of solitude. No mate would bind him. No bloodline renew until the one who spoke its language forgave the unforgivable. The visions sharpened, pulling Alara deeper. The traitor, a beta advisor with eyes like polished obsidian, whispering sedition in the shadows, his ambition a venom deadlier than any claw. Packs splintered, wars ignited under false moons, and Alaric, the ethical king, fleeing into exile to draw the hunt from his fractured realm. But woven through the crimson thread was her, Ilara, the barren Omega, her face flickering in the blood's narrative like a ghost summoned by destiny. The vial's whispers coalesced into words. She translates the wound that shattered the king. In her voice, the Deuce's mercy flows, binding curse to cure. Her gift was no curse, but the Pathfinder's mark, a hidden lineage from the old temples, empowering her to unravel blood's lies and weave truths that could heal even the gravest fractures. Gasping, Ilara pulled back, the blood's taste lingering like ash on her tongue, her body trembling as the cave snapped into focus. Alaric leaned forward, his scarred brow furrowed, the air between them charged with the lunar static of revelation. "What did you see?" he demanded softly, not as king to subject, but as a soul teetering on redemption's edge. His hand hovered near hers, not grasping, but yearning, the first crack in his isolation's armor. "Everything," she breathed, her voice a fragile thread in the fire's hush. "The queen's mercy killing, the traitor's shadow, the Deuce's curse, and me." Tears welled, hot against the cave's chill, tracing paths down her cheeks like molten silver. The weight of it crushed her. She, the rejected, held the key to his fate, her barrenness no flaw but a vessel for this spiritual fire. Yet doubt clawed at her core. What right had she to bind herself to his guilt when her own exile still bled fresh? The Omega pull warred with her freedom, empathy blooming into a bond that terrified as much as it illuminated. Alaric's eyes widened, the gray depths swirling with dawning awe, the king's melancholy yielding to a spark of hope as fragile as the embers. He reached for the vial then, his fingers brushing its warmth, and in that touch the blood sang anew, for both of them. The cave's shadows deepened, the distant weavos of the wind carrying omens of trials yet to come. But in this moment, under the moon's veiled gaze, Ilara knew. Her words would either crown him anew or chain her eternally to the throne of his wounds. The flames flickered low, whispering of revelations that demanded not just sight, but surrender. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon hung low over the jagged peaks, a silver sentinel casting its pallid light into the valley below, where the snow lay scarred by tracks of pursuit and defiance. Ilara stood at the cave's threshold, the vial's chain a cold weight against her collarbone, its crimson contents swirling like a storm-tossed sea, in response to the howls echoing from the tree line. Dawn's first blush bled into the horizon, painting the frost in hues of rose and steel, but the air thrummed with the promise of confrontation. Not the feral skirmish of the night, but something deeper, a reckoning woven from the threads of past and present. Alaric moved beside her, his wounds bound but his posture unyielding, the king's melancholy now laced with a quiet resolve that mirrored the vial's insistent pulse. They had not spoken of the revelation since the fire's dying light, but its echo lingered in every shared glance, every brush of fur against fur as they descended the mountain's flank toward the frozen river that marked the border of her old pack's lands. The wind carried scents first, the musky pack tang of her former kin, mingled with the acrid bite of smoke from ritual fires, and beneath it all, the traitor's shadow, obsidian sharp, laced with ambition's rot. Alara's stomach twisted, the Omega bond flaring not just to Alaric, but to the ghosts of loyalty she had once held dear. Rejection had been her exile, but now it pulled her back, a magnetic wound demanding closure. "They come for you," she murmured, her breath a fragile mist, eyes scanning the white expanse where figures emerged like wraiths from the mist-shrouded pines. Not the splintered remnants of his Iron Fang hunters, but her own, the elders in their silvered robes, the alpha who had cast her out, and flanking them, the rival, Kyle, the beta who had risen through whispers and blades, his eyes gleaming with the hunger of one who tasted thrones in stolen blood. Alaric's hand grazed her arm, a grounding heat that sent sparks through the vial, its language murmuring warnings. Betrayal circles, but truth cuts deeper. He stepped forward, his form a bulwark against the advancing line, gray eyes hardening into glacial steel. "This is no mere hunt," he said, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of councils where fates were forged. "The traitor binds your past to my curse. Face it with me, or flee to your freedom." The choice hung between them, heavy as the snow-laden branches overhead, a moral crossroads where love's fragile bloom clashed with the liberty of solitude. Alara's heart warred within her, to forgive the pack's scorn, to bind her gift to his redemption, or to sever all ties and wander unclaimed, her barrenness a shield rather than a chain. What was freedom, if not the terror of choosing mercy over the war that scarred her soul? The pack halted at the river's edge, the ice cracking faintly under their weight like the fracture of old oaths. Her former mate stepped forward first. His furred cloak embroidered with lunar motifs now stained by the frost of indifference. His eyes, once heated with promise during the rites, now held only calculation. "Exile returns with a fallen king," he snarled, voice echoing across the frozen water, the elders murmuring assent like wind through barren trees. "The Deusa rejects the barren and the cursed. Kale has claimed our alliance. Your wanderer brings only death." Kale emerged then, his form lean and predatory, a scar twisting his lip into a perpetual sneer, the same advisor's shadow from Alaric's visions, his ambition a venom that had poisoned realms and mates alike. He carried a blade etched with runes, its edge glinting like false moonlight, and in his gaze, Alara saw the blood's truth. He had whispered the rival's poison to Alaric's queen, not for the realm's sake, but to shatter the king and seize the Iron Fang throne, weaving her pack into his web of deceit. Alaric's growl rumbled low, a thunder that shook loose snow from the pines, but he held his ground, ethical restraint tempering the alpha's fury. "The traitor stands revealed," he called, his words cutting the air like a blade through fog. "Kale's venom felled my queen, splintered my clans. He hunts me to bury his sins in my blood." The pack shifted, unease rippling through their ranks as Alara felt the vial burn, its crimson tide flooding her senses. She stepped to the ice's brink, the cold seeping through her boots like doubt's chill grasp, and raised the vial high, unclasping it with trembling fingers. The blood within gleamed, a deep red oracle under the moon's gaze, and she let a single drop fall to the snow, a ritual invocation, her gift manifesting not in whispers, but in a voice that demanded hearing. The drop bloomed like a rose in winter, and the air thickened with spectral weight. Visions projected from her lips, not silent echoes but spoken truths, carried on the wind like uivos of judgment. Kael's hand poisoned the queen's womb, his whispers ignited the wars that bled the north. He rejected Alara not for barrenness, but to bind her pack to his shadow throne. Gasps rippled through the elders, her former mate's face paling as the blood's language wove around them, invisible threads revealing hidden pacts, stolen oaths, the crimson cost of his ambition. Kael lunged across the ice, blade raised, but Alaric intercepted, their clash a whirlwind of steel and claw, blood spraying in arcs that caught the dawn's light like rubies on white silk. The pack hesitated, torn between loyalty and the unveiling, while Alara's words continued, each syllable binding her deeper to Alaric, the king's guilt echoing in her chest, his redemption pulling at her like gravity. She could end it with a word. Forgive the pack, unite with Alaric in war against the traitor, forging love from the forge of shared battle. Or declare her freedom, letting the revelations shatter the alliances without her claim, walking away unburdened but alone. The vial's pulse quickened, the blood's tongue tasting of sacrifice. Mercy crowns the fallen, but only if forgiveness yields to union. Kael struck true, grazing Alaric's side, fresh crimson joining the old, and Alara's choice ignited. Rushing forward, her hand pressing to the wound mid-fight, translating its urgent plea. Heal through bond, or lose all to war's maw. The king's eyes met hers amid the fray, a plea unspoken, and in that visceral instant, empathy overpowered doubt. She whispered forgiveness to her past, not for them, but for the liberty of her heart, to choose love's chains over isolation's frost. The pack fractured then, elders turning on Kael as truths cascaded, his blade faltering under the weight of exposed sins. Alaric disarmed him with a final resounding blow, the traitor crumpling to the ice, blood pooling in a dark mirror of judgment. Panting, the king turned to Alara, his hand cupping her face, gray eyes alight with the dawn of possibility. The moon dipped lower, yielding to the sun's rise, but the wind carried a new howl, not of pursuit, but of awakening. Yet in her soul, the dilemma lingered. Had she chosen redemption, or merely traded one wound for another's embrace? The vial cooled against her skin, silent now, but its language echoed eternal, binding words that healed, even as they chained. The sun crested the peaks at last, a reluctant sovereign spilling golden fire across the fractured ice, where blood pooled in dark, accusing petals against the thawing white. Ilara knelt beside Alaric, her hands pressed to his side where Kael's blade had bitten deep, the warmth of his life seeping through her fingers like a vow unspoken. The river's edge hummed with the aftermath, elders murmuring in hushed tones of fractured oaths, her former mate slinking into the shadows with eyes averted, the pack's unity splintered like the ice beneath their feet. Kael lay bound in silver chains, his obsidian gaze dulled by defeat. The traitor's venom exposed not just in words, but in the crimson truths that had flowed from her lips. Yet victory tasted of ash in her mouth, for the revelations had bound her tighter than any exile's chain. The vial at her throat a pulsing heart, its blood now singing not of secrets, but of the inexorable cost of healing. Alaric's breath came ragged, his gray eyes locking onto hers with a depth that pierced the morning's chill, the king's melancholy yielding to something rawer, more vulnerable, the plea of a soul long adrift. He cupped her face, thumb tracing the frozen tear tracks on her cheek, his touch a forge's heat against the frost that had armored her heart since banishment. "You spoke my wounds into light," he whispered, voice a gravelly timbre laced with wonder and sorrow, carrying the weight of thrones reclaimed and curses unraveled. The Deusa's mark on his chest, that invisible silver scar, flickered beneath his torn cloak. No longer a burning thorn, but a fading ember, soothed by the language she had translated. Her gift, the Pathfinder's legacy, had woven through his blood's confessions, forgiving not the act, but the guilt that had chained him to isolation. In her words, mercy had crowned the fallen, but at what price to her own fractured freedom? Alara's chest tightened, the Omega bond flaring like moonlight on fresh snow, a visceral pull that urged union, yet clashed with the echo of her rejection, the barren hollow where her own dreams had withered. She had chosen in the fray. Forgiveness for the pack's scorn, not to reclaim her place among them, but to liberate her spirit from its grip. Now, as the wind sighed through the pines, carrying distant weavos of awakening packs, that choice demanded more, a sacrifice deeper than blood, a renascimento forged in the fire of what might be lost. The vial burned against her skin, its crimson contents swirling with visions of futures intertwined. A realm healed under his rule, her voice guiding the Iron Fang clans through shadowed councils, children not of flesh, but of legacy, born from the union of curse and cure. Yet doubt clawed at her core. What was love, if not the terror of yielding her wandering soul to his throne? Freedom had been her exile's bitter gift. To bind it now felt like trading one wound for another's embrace. Redemption, a chain disguised as grace. She rose slowly, pulling him with her, their forms silhouetted against the rising sun, blood-streaked and unbowed. The pack watched in silence, the elders' silver robes catching the light like threads of lunar judgment, their faces etched with the awe of truths unveiled. Kyle's labored breaths rasped from the ice, a final snarl twisting his lips. The barren seer claims a king. The Deusa mocks us all. But his words fell flat, dissolved in the wind's mournful howl, for the blood's language had stripped him bare, no longer shadow, but a broken remnant to be judged by the clans he sought to rule. Alaric turned to them then, his voice rising like thunder over glacial valleys, resonant with the ethical core that had defined his reign. The traitor falls not to my blade alone, but to the Deusa's truth, spoken through her. He gestured to Alara, his hand lingering on her shoulder, a possessive warmth that sent sparks through the vial, binding their fates in silver light. Rejection birthed this revelation. Let it rebirth our north. Join the Iron Fang, not in war, but in the mercy of mended oaths. The elders bowed one by one, their murmurs swelling to a chorus of assent, the pack's fractures sealing under the sun's witness. Her former mate met her gaze across the ice, a flicker of regret in his eyes, not love, but the hollow echo of what might have been, before he turned away, yielding the borders to this new alliance. Yet as the packs converged, furred forms weaving through the snow like threads in a grand tapestry, Alara felt the weight of her choice settle like fresh drifts. Union was no reward, but a proving ground. Her gift would translate not just blood, but the realm's wounds, demanding she sacrifice the solitude that had become her strength. Alaric drew her aside to a copse of ancient pines where the snow lay untouched, a sacred hush enveloping them. He knelt before her, not as king, but as the broken alpha marked by guilt, pressing his forehead to her hand. I rejected duty's cost once, he confessed, his breath warm against her chilled skin, and the Deusa cursed me to wander. Bind with me, Alara, not as Omega to throne, but as translator to the healed. Let your words cure what my blade could not. Tears welled anew, tracing paths of salt and release down her face, the vial's pulse sinking to their joined heartbeats. What was Renascimento, if not choosing the fire of connection over the frost of alone? She clasped the vial, unstoppering it fully for the first time, letting a single drop fall between them, a crimson seal upon the snow, blooming into a rose of fate. The blood sang its final verse. In union, wounds become wisdom, rejection, the forge of eternal light. Empathy flooded her, not as burden, but as power, the barren vessel overflowing with the spiritual fire of destiny. She pulled him to his feet, their lips meeting in a kiss born of suffering's alchemy, tender amid the tragedy, a vow under the fading moon's gaze. The north stirred around them, howls rising in harmony, fires kindled on distant hills to signal the mended packs. Alaric's curse lifted, the silver scar dissolving into peace, his melancholy transmuted to quiet strength. Ilara stood at his side, no longer exile, but the voice that had redeemed a king, and in doing so, reclaimed her own shattered worth. Yet in the depths of her soul, a whisper lingered. Love as proof, not prize, demanded eternal vigilance, lest old wounds reopen under new moons. The wind carried their scents southward, a promise etched in blood and light, the Deuce's revelation complete in sacrifice and rebirth. If your heart beat alongside ours, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.